I think some of the puzzle pieces are starting to come together. Now, rightfully so, a lot of my viewers have asked me some very pointed questions about how I have come to the conclusion that there is something going on other than what's being reported. And in the simplest possible terms, I'm going to go to the very first piece of information anyone got about this. It was the initial report. And in case anybody doesn't know what we're talking about the collision between the ACX Crystal container ship and the USS Fitzgerald. Okay. Coast Guard, speaking of Japanese Coast Guard, initially said the collision occurred at 2:20 a.m. because the Filipino crew had reported at 2:25 and said it just happened. However, after interviewing the crew members, the Coast Guard changed the collision time to 1:30. That's odd enough. Okay, but civilians, alright, possible. Adding to the confusion, though, a Navy official said it's sticking with the 2:20 a.m. timing for the crash that he said had been reported, and listen to this, folks, by the Fitzgerald. Explain that. Why would the Fitzgerald have reported it erroneously? Were they just mistaken in exactly the same way that the Philippine crew was? Was the Navy official speaking on behalf of information that he got from the Japanese Coast Guard? I doubt that. Being a Navy official, he would speak on information he got through Navy sources. So right then and there, that's the beginning and ending of my believing that there is something. And this was not 6 or 8 hours after it happened. This was 48 hours after it happened. This Navy spokesman said this. So right then and there, if you don't think it stinks bad enough that there was a 50-minute discrepancy in the initial time reported and the time they actually said it happened, and then they went and they turned around and all that, if that wasn't bad enough for you, when the Navy official goes to the original timing, that to me was enough to go down this road. Now, the U.S. Coast Guard is going to get a hold of these guys, and it looks like it already has been. On Tuesday, that would have been yesterday. So they're already doing their interviews. But I find it strange that the U.S. Coast Guard's taken the lead on it. I read another article, I couldn't find it again, that they are the ones that are, the U.S. Coast Guard is the lead investigative unit on this. But here's the thing, folks. If you're going to question whether I'm right or wrong, that's fair. And honest, I've always made the allegation that the people who come to my videos are a lot smarter than me, and I've been wrong before. But here's the question. If we go with the idea that it was an accident, and this really was what happened, everything they're saying is the gospel truth, folks, we might as well just mothball the fleet. Because if a container ship that is broadcasting its location on AIS in the middle of calm seas can just wallop into the side of one of our destroyers completely undetected, after the USS Cole, we're not supposed to have little bitty boats getting within 1,000 yards without getting blasted out of the sea. If we can do this, if we cannot do this, folks, if we can't operate one of our destroyers in a way that it doesn't know what's within 1,000 yards of it at any given time, I don't believe that about the Navy. I don't. I absolutely do not believe that. This was, accidents happen, but usually there's a whole lot of other mitigating circumstances that point to it. This was just two ships out in thousands of miles, square miles of empty ocean. And I've said it before, the bullet with a missile, no way. Now, if we're going to not go on that premise and say it was something other than an accident, one of two things has to be true. Either it was a planned event, and they knew where this destroyer was going to be and when it was going to be there, or it was a target of opportunity. I don't think it would have been a target of opportunity given that they were out there in a giant container boat sailing around looking just to see if they might happen into a destroyer. No. I think the plan and the course of this destroyer and where it would be and when it would be was something that was known ahead of time, and this was planned. Because that's the only thing that would make sense, for them to be able to make the course plan. Also, we still can't get the ultimate destination of that cargo ship out of the guy who owns it. You don't think that's strange, folks? Couldn't he just said it's going to Tokyo? Couldn't he just said it's going here, going there? He can't do that because any destination he puts down, somebody can say, okay, here is the course they would have taken, and then the course track falls apart. Or he doesn't know where to say to make the course track jive up. So here's what I think. And I'm just going to go on spitball here, but if you make the allegation that this was an act of terror, an attack, an act of war, you would have to reasonably assume that they knew where the ship was going to be and when it was going to be there. The next question, how did they get the information? Has there been any kind of a big security breach with the Navy lately? Has there been anybody who's lost information, been compromised in an area where this might have been able to be used against them? Well, lo and behold, folks, just a few weeks ago, I covered this. I covered this down in Colombia. It was on Memorial Day. 3 very high-ranking Marines were basically mugged in an area of Bogota they weren't even authorized to be in while they were in possession of classified materials. U.S. issued laptops, tablets, and phones on top of personal stuff. Now, here's the thing. The initial report I got didn't have all the details, but this one does. And I'm going to read it for you. 3 married men, 3 married Navy officers. Marine Colonel Roger T. McDuffie, a Harrier pilot serving as the Chief of Operations at MAR for South. Major Andrew L. Mueller, described as a theater security cooperation planner, and Major Mauricio Saenz, exercise planner, face appropriate administrative or judicial proceedings. Now, here we go. If you don't know what happened here, basically these guys went on a pub crawl and got drunk and stayed out later than they were supposed to and got into an area they weren't even supposed to be in, hooked up with 4 Colombian prostitutes, and they drugged them and they took their electronics. Now, here's the thing. The report describes how the married officers went to an off-limits neighborhood of Bogota and later returned to their hotel rooms after curfew with 4 local women. McDuffie and Mueller, according to the newspaper's report, were drugged and passed out in their rooms. Several of their belongings were stolen, including a work laptop, other government-issued equipment, and personal cell phones. Saenz was not drugged, but like the other 2 officers, he drank and consorted with the women. Interesting. Anyway, this Miami Herald article covers this, but we had 3 weeks ago some Bogota prostitutes get a hold of electronics in the possession of very high-ranking Marine officers. Now someone's going to ask me, well, what does that have to do with, how would they have that information? You don't know. What could have been gleaned from those particular pieces of electronics? The reason I think this might be tied in is because of something else we covered on the channel. This is the Vice President of Venezuela. He's a man named Tarek al-Assimi, and he is a Syrian Druze. And we covered in another video how this man has allowed tens of thousands of Hezbollah terrorists to get into Venezuela and into Colombia. In fact, he was convicted of doing deals with the FARC and the ELN, and these are groups, if you don't know who these are, go back to my videos, and I've covered. Before I started covering this Navy issue, I covered the threat coming from south of our border, the terrorist threat. So, riddle me this. Some terrorists get a hold of this information, and in it, it shows war plan, and it maybe has passwords in it. It maybe has access to things that now we don't know who knows what. And they come across this. Maybe there's a way in there that they are able to divine of how to find out the different electronic signals that a U.S. destroyer puts off so that it can be tracked. Now, the last piece of the puzzle is a man named Rodrigo Duterte. Remember the Philippine crew? He has kind of a new foreign policy over there. The Duterte administration has vowed to pursue an independent foreign policy that would reject any meddling by foreign governments, blah, 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 blah. And he also says, following his inauguration as president, Duterte mentioned his willingness to reorient his foreign policy towards China and Russia, particularly in the areas of trade and commerce. And everybody knows that the Philippines is completely overrun with Muslims. So do you think maybe possibly these two groups of people got together? Somebody over there said, hey, look what we got. We figured this out about how to do this with a U.S. ship. And so somebody put together a little plan. And they went and they executed it. Not very well. They didn't sink the ship, but they killed 7 sailors. And to them, that's a win. Now, they may or may not have had the ability to disable the electronics. I personally think they do. That's why we wouldn't have had any communications coming out of the USS Fitzgerald about this ship that was running up on its rear starboard that it couldn't seem to outrun or avoid or get out of the way, or didn't know was there. Maybe they figured out a way to hide. Who knows? All I know is 3 weeks ago, 3 high-level, high-ranking Marines that were in charge of MAR for South were compromised and had classified materials on them in Bogota, Colombia, an area now known to be a haven for Hezbollah and Muslim terrorists. And then 3 weeks later, coincidentally, we now have 7 dead sailors in a very strange, inexplicable accident. Sorry. I don't think it's a coincidence. I mean, everybody's entitled to their opinion. Believe what you want, but look real close at this, folks. This is not an accident. This is not an accident. Anyway, thanks for the support. Appreciate it. Like, share, subscribe.